Greetings and welcome to week 3. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sitting out in front of the Daniels College of Business with my dog Bailey. And if you didn't notice, for this week, I invited a studio audience to join us. They're right over there in case you can't see them. For this week, I'm not going to give you my take on the 2 readings and the video. Yeah, I know. But instead, what I would like to say about them is that the behavior modification article, the adult learning theory article, and the Daniel Pink video all are slightly different takes on the same concept. And that concept is engagement. Yeah, engagement. And now engagement could be, the work environment that your client's coming from, and maybe that's part of the problem or that's an issue related to the intervention. But the way we're going to really look at it today or this week is the engagement in the individual intervention process. And so the kind of questions you'd want to ask around an employee or a manager's engagement in the process is, first, is this a voluntary or mandatory client? Did they choose to be there or were they sent to see you? If it's mandatory, are they engaged and motivated despite the fact that it's mandatory to make the necessary changes to move forward? And if not, do you think that you'll be able to get them there? Can you pick that up in your your interactions with them? Do they view this individual intervention as an opportunity to help them or as a punishment? If they are able to change their behavior, what will be the benefits and what's the incentive for them to change the behavior? Will their supervisor and coworkers be able to support any changes made to the individual interventions? Or are they part of the problem? And lastly, if they are unable to change, what are the consequences moving forward because of that? I want to share a kind of a case study for you, but of a situation I was in. And it's not necessarily an individual intervention, but was more of a group intervention. So it was a big time satellite company. And it was actually the CEO that asked me to come and do a team, not a team development workshop. And in the workshop were all the managers. And the managers were scientists, multiple degreed, researchers, people that have much more intelligence than I. And so here I am doing this workshop. It's a one-day workshop. And, I'm going through the basics of teams and, and using some of my funny lines and this and that. And what I was noticing is that the energy was extremely low. People weren't participating. And something seemed to be going on with the group. And, I had maybe 20 people in there. So finally, after about an hour, hour and a half, I just called a timeout and I'm like, look, what's going on? It just seems like the energy's low and nobody's really bought into this workshop. And I was grateful I did that because what came out was people saying that they didn't see value in it, and it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with their work culture. They didn't see value because it wasn't a team-oriented work culture. That ultimately, even though they preached teams, the CEO and his management team made all the decisions and then just pushed down what they decided was going to happen. So in other words, this team class was a direct contradiction to what was actually happening in the work culture. So now I had this dilemma. So then what do? Do I go through with the class and waste everybody's time, including my own? And so I decided, you know what? All right. So tell me about this culture and what parts of it are not a team, and what would it look like if it became a team, and what do you need in order to feel like you're part of a team? And suddenly energy started coming from the room. And so we subdivided into subgroups, and people got excited, and it was like, all right. So, and I started just facilitating instead of teaching, really. And what came out of this was they wanted to identify what they as managers needed from the senior management in order to feel engaged in this process and for the team concept to actually be true. And so they created lists, and there was, and they did little presentations in the class. They selected 2 or 3 people to go approach senior management, and they were going to lay this all out. And it was very proactive. The engagement was as high as you could imagine. And it all happened, though, after the class, right? And what ended up occurring was senior management was just shut down this whole conversation. Not only did they shut it down, but of course I got reprimanded because I didn't produce what they hired me to do, which is a class on teams. And the CEO, I mean, they had to pay me essentially, but basically hired another consultant to go in to do the teams classes because it was on his list of what needed to be done in this fiscal year. And so he just threw cold water on everything. And yeah, I really pity the next trainer that had to go in and try and teach them teams after what just happened. It was so disappointing. But what it really reflects is, where engagement starts from the top down, and how critical it is for people to feel engaged, and how for those 3 or 4 hours I was with them when they were engaged, it was the most powerful, one of the most powerful groups I've ever been a part of. And it was so exciting, and I don't regret what I did, because I got in touch with what the engagement was for them and essentially what that would look like in the workplace. And unfortunately, the work environment was going to continue to be an inconsistent, do what I say, not what I do kind of culture. And that's kind of how it played out. And I never heard from them again and have no idea how that played. But you can see the importance of engagement. And that's why this week is dedicated to this topic. Now, one of the most common complaints I get when I talk to employees, be it through individual interventions or group work or whatever, is that there's a drastic lack of positive acknowledgement, positive feedback in their work environment, particularly from their supervisor or manager. Then when I talk to these managers, this is what I hear, and I'm stereotyping and I'm generalizing. So take it with a grain of salt, but this is pretty much what I hear, which is, why would I need to provide positive acknowledgement or reinforcement or feedback for people who are just doing their job? Can you see the dilemma here? If an employee wants more direction and feedback from their particular manager, do they deserve to get it? Yes, they do. In my opinion, it is the job of a manager to grow and develop their employees and to tweak their management style for each individual member so that they feel like they're getting those needs met. I know, right? That to me is the most important thing. One size management style does not fit all. my way or the highway or command and control management styles do not in any way create engagement. Instead, what they create is fear and apathy. And oftentimes, these are the people we're going to see in individual interventions, or that's going to be the environment that they're coming from. So, how does behavior modification impact employee engagement? How does adult learning theory impact employee engagement? How does intrinsic and extrinsic rewards impact employee engagement? That's what this week's readings are all about. And they directly impact what's happening in the work environment and what you're going to see in individual interventions. I know, really. I want to show you two PowerPoint slides. Okay, as you can see, and you may have seen this. It's a Gallup poll, and it's their employee engagement 12 questions. The Gallup organization has actually made this into employee engagement survey for whole companies. But I'm going to show you what the 12 questions are, because what these represent is an environment, a work environment, and what employees need in a work environment to feel engaged, right? So the first one, do you know what is expected of you at work? Is everything spelled out and you know what success is and what measurement looks like that's going to be used for your performance review and just for how well you're doing your job? Do you have the materials and equipment to do your work right? Do you have all the resources necessary to be successful? And I would throw in there, and the training and development to feel like you're effective. At work, do you have the opportunity at work to do what you do best every day? Do you feel like you're making a difference? In the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise from doing good work? Does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? And really, all these 11 other items kind of feed into this one, which is probably the most important, because at the end of the day, how do you feel about yourself in the presence of your workplace, the work you're doing, and the people you're working with? Is there someone at work who encourages your development? And that's where some of the positive feedback might come from. At work, do your opinions seem to count? Does your opinion seem to count? Do you have input? Like with the satellite company, the one attempt they made to give upward feedback got smashed. Can you imagine what the engagement of those 20 scientists and researchers was after they tried to make it happen? Higher or lower than it was before the class I was teaching? Does the mission purpose of your company make you feel your job is important? Is there a link between what the purpose of the company is and the work you're doing, and can you feel it and seem like you're having an impact? Are your associates, fellow employees, committed to doing quality work? And for the ones that aren't, are there consequences? Do you have a best friend at work? And I don't like this question. I think what they're really saying is, do you have a confidant at work? Somebody you can really talk to and kind of vent a little bit with. And in the last 6 months, has somebody at work talked to you about your progress? And lastly, in the last year, have you had the opportunity to learn and grow in some way, shape, or form? So these 12, where am I? Okay, so those 12 questions really are what the Gallup poll has kind of created as the top 12 items that impact an environment to create employee engagement. Now, I've encouraged supervisors just to take those 12 questions and to create their own Likert scale. You know, it could be on a 5 scale, strongly agree, neutral or unknown or something like that, disagree and strongly disagree, and do an anonymous poll with their teams, and then put the scores up on the wall at the next department meeting or team meeting. And what it's going to tell you is A, how engaged people feel or don't feel, and B, where your work is. It's, you know, like the gap model. It's where we are, where we want to be, assuming that people want to be engaged, right? So that would be a great exercise, or even a tool to use with a manager that just wants to improve. But it's also going to tell you a lot about where the employee's coming from and what their experience is, and if they feel valued. And these are the kind of issues that are going to surface in the individual interventions as well. So to kind of wrap this up a little bit, I want to just specifically just kind of give you my take on how do you deal with a mandated client. So they're forced to come see you, who are upset and maybe even resistant for any help at this point. What do you do? Now, this is just off the cuff, but what I'm going to say is, number one is separate out the emotion. And this comes from my counseling background. But if you got emotion mixed up with this issue, the emotion's going to cloud how people see the issue and how they see everything happening. So separate them out. How do you separate them out? Is allow them to vent, allow them to feel heard and to acknowledge what they have to say. That doesn't mean you agree or disagree, but, you know, giving them a forum to kind of put that stuff out. And then as they start to separate out the emotion, then they're in a better place to be able to do the work. Two, I would say, identify together with them the gap. Where are they at? Where do they need to be? And where's the work to get from point A to point B? Now, if they're written up or on a PIP, performance improvement program, then you would need to incorporate what items for improvement in the PIP into the gap model. And as I mentioned, I think in a previous video, if it's a write-up, there's usually bullet points on what needs to improve ASAP. And in a way, that becomes part of your gap model, or yeah, gap analysis, I guess. Obtain buy-in from your client, and I mean intrinsic buy-in. Now, the extrinsic buy-in is going to be the threat of losing their job, right? So that's huge. But the reality is that's not going to be strong enough unless they buy into how they could benefit and how this intervention process can help improve them. Like this is what the whole engagement thing's about. They've got to want to change. They got to see value in the change. They got to be willing to commit into this process, which is what the readings and the motivation video was all about. And so part of our jobs as an OD consultant is to help them get there. And that's where some of the work's going to be. Also provide encouragement along the way and a plan. What's the plan? What are we going to do? How is working together going to look like? And what is it going to look like when we're done? And what else could they be doing? Part of the plan, I think it gives them a foundation and something stable. And then lastly, provide advice and suggestions to their supervisor. And here's the key thing. Now, again, this is for mandated situations. And in a mandated situation, it's usually, in most cases, the supervisors who's mandating them. So they need to be a part of the process. And what you're going to find in the individual interventions is some things or suggestions or recommendations or advice that the manager could use or do, and it might impact the whole work environment too, to help make this successful, so that during and after the intervention, that the environment that this employee is going back to reinforces the changes that have been made. So those are the keys, and that's really what I got for this week. Thank you very much. So let me just switch gears to some administrative odds and ends, and we'll wrap this puppy up. First off, for this week, if you haven't noticed, the 2 discussion questions. The first one is to provide critique on the other team's intake form. And so I kind of laid it out on what to provide that, but just kind of be mindful of that. And I would just emphasize, constructive critiques and provide suggestions if you can think of, or just play devil's advocate, maybe even with them. Just give them any kind of input you can give, and put some thought into it. And the second discussion board question, what you'll notice is you won't be able to see your fellow classmates' responses until you finish. And the reason I did that, and I do that throughout this course, is because I want original ideas. I don't want you to take off of Mary Sue's concept. I want to hear each of your ideas. And then when you halfway through the week, kind of provide thoughts and comments to other people's responses, that's where you can kind of do that. So that's for this week. And as you probably notice, your homework for next week is, because we're going to be talking about what's the process and for these individual interventions. And so you've got OD process article. So read that. And you've also got article on confidentiality. And that's something we'll talk about next week, because that's kind of a sticky subject. Like, what is it? What isn't it? How's it different than a private conversation? And what if the supervisor wants to know what you talked about? Like, how do you handle that? So we'll talk about that. And that's what those 2 articles are. And then you've got a video on what's called the GROW model. It's a coaching model. And GROW, those are the 4 components of the GROW model. And it's something you'll be able to use in multiple different types of coaching, but it's also relevant for this. So I think that's all I got. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week. Lame, I know.